Welcome back to the channel, my beautiful people. I trust that everyone is having a wonderful day today. Guys, thank you for the love. Thank you for the support. My name is Dwight, and it's a great pleasure to have you here. So guys, if you're new to the channel, I welcome you. If you're returning, welcome back. So welcome back to another reaction video, and on today's agenda, we're going to be diving into what they never told you about what happened to the dead bodies on D-Day. Now, guys, I had no idea what D-Day was, so I went to research what D-Day was, and D-Day refers to on the day June 6, 1944, one of the deadliest operations of World War II. The beaches of Normandy were strewn with bodies of thousands of soldiers who lost their lives during the invasion. Wow. So I am here today, guys, to just take a glimpse into what happened to the bodies, the dead bodies. So you out there know more about this than I do, so please, guys, just fill me in with some more information. But I hope we get a lot from this. So guys, please join me in watching this video. But before we go to the video, I would like you to take some time to like, subscribe, and share with your friends and your families. Alright guys, so without any further ado, let's just get right to it.
The bloodiest battles in history are often remembered for their sheer scale and massive casualties. But rarely do we stop to think about what happens to the corpses of fallen soldiers, whose stories can be as incredible as the events that take place in the confrontations themselves. The attack of June 6, 1944, better known as D-Day, is a clear example of this. That day, thousands of Allied and Axis power soldiers lost their lives during fighting on the beaches of the coast. However, the death of all of them did not mean the end of their stories in the war. The rescue of the remains of the Allied soldiers would become a nightmare for the survivors, and even the Axis fighters would find themselves involved in that unpleasant mission. Upon landing in Normandy, the Allied soldiers encountered heavily prepared German resistance and unfavorable weather that further complicated the situation. This generated a chaotic confrontation that culminated in an enormous number of casualties. However, that day was not only going to be remembered for the complexity and terrible consequences of the battle, but also for everything that would later happen to the bodies of the fallen soldiers. Obtaining an exact number of victims becomes a difficult task, due to the large number of deaths on the battlefield and various circumstances that made the subsequent work even more complicated. However, at present, it is possible to obtain an approximate amount from the information provided by the memorials. The numbers are staggering. Around 4,414 Allied soldiers are believed to have lost their lives on D-Day, with the worst casualties at Omaha Beach at around 2,000 American fighters. On other beaches on the Normandy coast, some 2,000 British soldiers and about 340 Canadians died. For their part, the German forces suffered between 4,000 and 9,000 casualties.
Now, this is something I always think about. What happened to, because with the sheer number of soldiers dying on, the beaches, in the fields, guys, there wasn't initially a coordinated effort to recover these bodies. Now, with the fighting continuing relentlessly, guys, and the dead just keep on piling up, this is something I always question myself about. I'm going to bring this back, and let's continue watching.
The German forces suffered between 4,000 and 9,000 casualties. In the chaos and confusion of the fighting, it was impossible for commanders to conduct casualty control of service members. For this reason, it became even more difficult to determine the specific time and place where a combatant died. Also, many of them ended up with a different company. Added to this was the fact that the missing soldiers were not declared dead until a year after their disappearance.
Wow.
The dead on D-Day were not always cared for in the moments after their death. The survivors were quite busy taking up positions along the coast and could not stop under any circumstances. As a solution to this problem, a group of soldiers was created to search graves as soon as possible. But then, what happened to the thousands of bodies that fell during the exact moment of the attack? The only thing the soldiers could do at that moment was cover the remains of their comrades with a blanket or other cloth they had at hand and continue advancing. Before their astonished eyes, the waters of the beaches were dyed red and they could see how some debris floated on them. The number of dead bodies in the place was so great that those soldiers who managed to survive had to step over the corpses to continue on their paths. Some of the combatants could see how the bodies were frequently washed up on the shore. Thus, the amount of remains that they had to recover and bury in provisional tombs kept increasing. The panorama was already worthy of a nightmare, and yet the worst was yet to come. Once the Allied troops had taken the German positions and were able to control the Normandy beaches, they had to push further into France and the rest of Europe. But the continuation of their work was interrupted by the thousands of corpses behind them. For these men, leaving them out in the open where they fell was not an option, so they decided to find a quick and workable solution. Not having enough time to establish a formal cemetery, the survivors decided to create temporary graves near the beach, both out of respect and hygiene. Thus, with great determination and few resources, they began the difficult task. One of those charged with carrying out and guiding this work was Sergeant Albert E. Legg. Together with his companions, they made temporary tombs with the elements they had available, parts of wooden boxes to build tombstones and remains of parachutes as shrouds. Thanks to the efforts made by the
I'm going to pause this here real quick. Now, this is so amazing, how they took the initiative, to bury the colleagues. Now, once the beachhead was secured, some soldiers and some burial teams started to bury the dead in makeshift graves, guys. Wow. Now, that was done, to prevent the spread of diseases and to boost, the morals. All right, guys, so I'm going to bring this back and let's continue watching.
Stones and remains of parachutes as shrouds. Thanks to the efforts made by these soldiers, 8 cemeteries were established in the area before June 10th. However, the experience was especially disturbing for those who participated. So says Private Thomas J. Dowling, who remembers that the bodies of his colleagues decomposed so quickly that even the effort to bury them before this happened was in vain. But, believe it or not, this task was not carried out only by the Allies. Even some captured German soldiers were forced to work as gravediggers in the provisional cemeteries.
Nice.
At first, the prisoners thought that the graves they were digging were for themselves and refused to continue.
It's not funny, but
learning that the thousands of remains of Allied soldiers would rest there, they agreed to complete the task. In this way, they played a very important role in helping to bury the growing number of corpses. Identification of the deceased also proved a daunting task. It was only easy to recognize those soldiers who wore insignia with the name and the company to which they belonged on their necks. When this was not the case, members of grave search groups were forced to dig deeper to match a body to an identity and family. Driver's licenses, letters, clothing, and even fingerprints and dental records were used to make positive identification in those cases. To the traumas generated by the combat experience itself, several men had to add the horrible situation of having to search for the remains of their companions to provide them with a decent burial. Many times, they had to remove the pieces of bodies that remained in the water or caught in the boats. Soldiers rarely had bathing facilities or clean clothes to change into, so they often continued to work with the blood of their colleagues on their uniforms. As if all this were not enough, the retreating Germans used to plant explosives on the bodies, making the experience extremely dangerous as well as unpleasant. However, despite the efforts made, the remains of some soldiers were never found. But not everything ended there, since the repatriation also took time, generating great anguish for the families of the dead on D-Day. Firstly, because no deceased would be returned to their homes until the end of the war in 1945. In addition, officers had to coordinate the repatriation of dead soldiers from around the world, further delaying the rendezvous. Finally, in 1951, more than 179,000 bodies were returned to their families. However, some fighters are in permanent graves in Europe, far from their hometowns. What happened with the bodies of D-Day marked the lives of many people. The surviving soldiers and the families involved were left with consequences that are difficult to forget. Some of the fallen were recovered and registered by grave search staff, others were buried on the battlefield by their own comrades, while those who were lost met a darker fate. Today, there are 27 military cemeteries in the area that include soldiers from both the Allied and Axis powers. Especially famous is the Normandy American Cemetery, located next to Omaha Beach, where 9,387 soldiers rest.
Wow!
The famous cemetery features a garden of the missing with memorials for 1,557 service members who were never recovered. This makes it possible to pay tribute to all those who participated in this historic confrontation, even regardless of the tragic fate of their bodies. This was the shocking story of the fallen in Normandy. Thank you for joining us until the end. We will meet again in the next military history video.
Wow, what the soldiers did, was amazing. And not just the soldiers, they also ever took charge, like in Normandy, the American cemetery and other Commonwealth cemeteries became a final resting place for many of the soldiers. Some bodies were sent back to the home countries in if families requested it. So that it's so amazing. But sadly, many soldiers remained unidentified and are buried in graves marked known unto God. Wow. So what they did, like temporary graves, burying these soldiers, to prevent the spread of diseases, the smell, because that smell could be, and seeing the friends, the colleagues, that could be traumatic, man. So just prevent themselves from being that way. I see they took the initiative to bury their own dead. Wow. Alright guys, this is it for today. Thank you very much for joining me in looking at D-Day. And I had no idea what D-Day was, so I'm gonna dive deeper into that. So feel free guys to leave your suggestions, engage with the audience, and cause this is what we're all about on the channel. And I will be leaving the original link down in my description so you guys can go and take a look. Alright, so this is where I come to the end of this reaction. But sit back, relax to see what I got coming up next, because I have some amazing content coming up for you. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it for friends and your families. Alright, so I'll see you back. Have yourselves a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe out there. Don't forget to share the love, not the hate. Peace out. I love y'all.